I stood by my son's casket, my hand trembling as I touched his cheek for the last time. Lucas Whitaker. My only child. My beautiful boy. He looked peaceful, too peaceful for someone taken at just 42. I was 68. I had never imagined I would outlive him. No parent should. Cancer took him fast, 3 months from diagnosis to death. It wasn't enough time. Not enough to say goodbye, not enough to prepare for a life without him. The world kept turning, but mine had stopped the moment he took his last breath. "Miss Whitaker, would you like to sit down?" the funeral director asked gently. I nodded. My legs were shaking, and I allowed myself to be guided to the front row. People filtered in and out, whispering condolences I barely heard. I accepted their hugs and handshakes as if on autopilot. Beside me sat Alyssa, my daughter-in-law of 15 years. Her black dress was perfectly pressed, makeup flawless, her posture composed. She had always carried herself like someone who understood appearances mattered. She had been Lucas's college sweetheart. I once thought of her as the daughter I never had. She leaned over and squeezed my hand. "I need some air," she whispered. I nodded again. She walked down the aisle with practiced grace, and I found myself wondering how we would get through this together. Lucas had been our bridge. Without him, what would our relationship look like? A few minutes later, I needed to take my medication. My arthritis was flaring, and the pain in my joints was becoming impossible to ignore. I got up slowly, cane in hand, and shuffled down the hallway toward the restroom. That's when I heard it. Around the corner, by the alcove where people smoked between services, Alyssa's voice cut through the low murmurs. Bright, almost cheerful. "God, I thought this day would never end," she sighed. "So many people, all acting like they care. Dropping off casseroles like it'll fix anything." A woman chuckled. "It's almost over now." "Yes," Alyssa replied. "And next, I finally get my life back. I finally get to be rid of that old shrew." My blood froze. The other woman hesitated. "You mean Dorothy?" "Of course Dorothy," Alyssa scoffed. "Lucas insisted she live with us after Richard died, and I went along with it. But now, Lucas is gone. I don't have to pretend anymore." "What will you do with her?" "There's a perfectly decent nursing home on the edge of town," Alyssa said, and then she laughed. A sound I'd once found musical now struck me as cruel. "She's pushing 70, she went on. "It's where she belongs. And with what resources is she going to fight me? The house is in my name. Lucas and I made sure of that years ago. When Richard died, we told her to sign everything over to us to avoid probate. She did. And the old bat still doesn't know Lucas left everything to me. In a week, she'll be packing her bags." My grip tightened around my cane. I had come to this funeral to mourn my son, not to overhear betrayal. My heart was pounding. The hallway spun slightly, but I kept silent. I backed away, unnoticed. Back in the chapel, I sat down again and looked at Lucas's still face. Had he known? Had he realized who she really was? I dried my tears and straightened my shoulders. Alyssa thought I was weak, but today was not her victory. Not yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest bedroom, the one Alyssa always called yours, though it had never truly felt like mine. I stared at the ceiling, her words echoing in my mind, that old shrew. Nursing home. In a week, she'll be packing her bags. I thought about how I'd ended up here, in this house that was never mine, with a daughter-in-law who now viewed me as a burden to discard. 8 years ago, my husband Richard passed away suddenly, a heart attack. No warning. One moment we were gardening together, the next he was gone. Lucas and Alyssa came right away. They helped with the funeral, held my hands during the prayers, brought me tea at night, when I couldn't sleep. It was Alyssa who first suggested I move in with them. "Dorothy," she'd said gently, "that house is too big for one person. You'll be lonely rattling around by yourself." Lucas nodded. "We have plenty of space here, and we could use the money from the sale to invest for your future. You'd never have to worry about anything again." It sounded logical, sensible, loving. So I sold the house Richard and I had shared for over 40 years. The house where Lucas had taken his first steps, celebrated every birthday, where we'd planted roots as a family. I signed over the deed, handed them the check, $287,000. They promised it would be used wisely, that it would grow. I never asked for statements, never checked balances. I trusted them completely. The house we moved into, the one I live in now, was stunning. A spacious 2-story with marble countertops and a landscaped backyard. The down payment came from my money. So did the kitchen remodel and the backyard pool Elisa had dreamed of. The vacation home in Colorado. That, too, was paid for by the last of Richard's life insurance. Elisa said it would be simpler if both properties were under their names for tax reasons. I didn't question it. Why would I? They were family. I remembered Elisa's smile during those early years. How she brought me chamomile tea in the evenings, encouraged me to spend time with Jake and Emily. How she hugged me on holidays and said, "We're so lucky to have you." Was it all just a performance? I got out of bed and walked slowly to the window. The moonlight lit up the backyard, manicured hedges, stone patio, pool lights glowing faintly. All of it funded by my trust, and yet now, none of it belonged to me. Somewhere along the way I had gone from mother-in-law to invisible, from family to fixture, from Dorothy to a burden. I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser and pulled out the old photo album I kept hidden. Lucas as a baby, Lucas with his first bike, Lucas at graduation, beaming, and Elisa always polished, always smiling, but somehow always just slightly distant. Had I mistaken appearances for affection? I turned another page. A family portrait from their 10th anniversary. Elisa stood next to Lucas, but she wasn't holding his hand. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Back then, I thought nothing of it. Now, it felt like a warning I hadn't seen coming. Once the veil was lifted, it was impossible not to see everything differently. Looking back, I realized the signs had always been there, scattered like crumbs I'd chosen to ignore. At the time, I had brushed them off, convinced myself Elisa was just tired, just busy, just stressed. But now I saw it for what it was, quiet dismissal, slowly turning into quiet disdain. It started small. When I struggled to climb into the SUV because of my arthritis, Elisa would let out a barely concealed sigh before helping me. Not impatient, not exactly rude, just bothered. When I asked her for help setting up my email on the new tablet Lucas had gifted me, she handed it back 10 minutes later with a strained smile. "There, it's simple now. Just try not to press too many buttons, okay?" I'd laughed at the time, trying to seem lighthearted, but my cheeks had burned. Family dinners were often scheduled when my bridge club met. I offered to reschedule my games, but she always responded with a sweet jab. "You know how much family means to Lucas, but if your little card group is more important." I had canceled more bridge nights than I could count. Yet there was always this undercurrent that I owed her something for living under her roof, even if it was my money that built it. Then there were the kids. Jake and Emily were the light of my life. I loved reading to them, baking cookies on the weekends, telling them stories about when their dad was young. But over time, those moments were rationed. "I just think they need consistency," Elisa would say. "Too much excitement from grandma throws off their rhythm." So I became the occasional presence, the quiet observer, allowed into their lives, but never quite trusted to be alone with them. And I accepted it. I told myself it was temporary. That one day, Elisa would see how much I loved them. That if I just stayed kind, stayed helpful, stayed useful, she'd come around. What a fool I had been. I remembered one afternoon, just before Lucas's diagnosis, when I'd caught a strange glimpse of her phone screen. She'd asked me to fetch her charger. The screen had lit up with a message from someone named Ryan. "Can't wait to see you again. Last time was amazing. She'd quickly snatched the phone from my hand, laughing off my raised eyebrow. One of my clients. They're all dramatic. At the time, I believed her. Real estate was an odd world, I told myself. Maybe he was just enthusiastic. But now it all made sense. The business trips that stretched into weekends. The new haircut, subtle makeup just to run errands. The shift in her demeanor as Lucas grew weaker. She had been preparing for life after him long before he passed. And I had been right there, helping her fold laundry and set the dinner table, completely blind to the woman she truly was. The night before the will was to be read, I barely slept. I lay in bed listening to the silence of the house, too large, too hollow without Lucas in it. Somewhere down the hall, Elisa moved about, likely preparing her outfit for tomorrow. She always believed in making a statement, especially when there was something to gain. But she had no idea what Lucas had done. 3 weeks before he passed, during a rare moment when Elisa had stepped out to arrange hospice care, Lucas had asked me to sit beside him. His voice was thin, barely louder than a whisper, but his eyes, those same brown eyes from his childhood, were crystal clear. "Mom," he had said, reaching for my hand, "there's something I need you to know. It's important." I leaned in, brushing back his hair gently. "I'm listening, sweetheart." I've made some changes to the will, quietly, carefully, just in case." He had paused then, breath catching in his chest. I tried to stop him. He needed rest, but he squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. "She won't see it coming," he whispered. "She thinks she has everything, but she doesn't." I asked him what he meant, but he only shook his head. "Talk to Mr. Bradley. He knows. Just trust me, Mom." I didn't press. I didn't want to. I wasn't ready to think about the world without him. But now, lying in this room that was never truly mine, I clung to those words like a lifeline. She thinks she has everything, but she doesn't. The next morning, I rose early, put on my best gray dress, simple, soft, with the tiny embroidered flowers Richard had always loved, and brushed my hair into a neat bun. I caught my reflection in the mirror and steadied myself. Let her think she's won. Let her wear her designer suit and walk into that law office with confidence. Let her. Because Lucas had left something behind, and I intended to find out exactly what it was. A knock sounded on the door. "Grandma?" Jake's voice? I opened the door, and there he was, taller than I remembered from just a few months ago. At 14, he had his father's quiet eyes and that same gentle frown when he was worried. "Mom said to tell you we're leaving in an hour," he said softly. So smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll be ready." He didn't move. Instead, he stepped forward and hugged me tight. "I miss Dad," he murmured. "I know, honey," I whispered. "I miss him too." From behind him, Elisa's voice called sharply, "Jake, don't hold up Grandma. She needs time to get ready." Her words were sugar-coated, but her tone wasn't. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, I saw the steel beneath the smile, the certainty that she'd won. "Today's an important day," she said smoothly. I nodded. "Yes," I said softly. "Yes, it is." Because Elisa was about to learn something she never expected. Lucas had made arrangements. And today they would come to light. The law office of Bradley Associates occupied the top floor of an aging brick building downtown. The elevator creaked on the way up, its fluorescent light flickering above our heads. I stood quietly beside Elisa and the children, leaning on my cane, focusing on every breath. Elisa, on the other hand, looked ready for a board meeting. She wore a fitted black pantsuit, sharp heels that clicked across the hardwood floor, and a sleek ponytail that said control more than grief. She moved like someone who already knew the outcome. Jake and Emily followed close behind, unusually quiet. I reached for Emily's shoulder as we walked into the conference room. She pressed herself closer to me, her small fingers curling around mine. At least they still wanted my comfort, no matter what Elisa might have told them. Mr. Bradley stood when we entered. "Mrs. Whitaker, Miss Whitaker, Jake, Emily, thank you for coming," he said with a calm nod. A soft-spoken man in his 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and thinning gray hair, he'd been Lucas's attorney for over a decade. He gestured to the long oak table where several folders were neatly stacked. "I know this is a difficult time," he began, settling into his seat. "Lucas was very specific about his wishes. It is my responsibility to ensure they are carried out exactly as he intended." Elisa gave a solemn nod. But under the table I saw her fingers tapping lightly on her thigh, impatient. "Before we begin," Mr. Bradley said, adjusting his glasses, "I should inform you that Lucas made some changes to his will approximately 6 weeks before his passing." That made her fingers still instantly. "Changes," she echoed, her voice just a little too high. "He never mentioned any changes to me." Mr. Bradley looked at her over the rims of his glasses. "He came to see me privately. He was very clear about his instructions." A flicker of something passed over her face, uncertainty, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Well, I suppose we should proceed." Mr. Bradley opened the folder in front of him. "Regarding the primary family residence at 242 Willow Street and the vacation home in Estes Park. Both properties are to be placed in a family trust, with Dorothy Whitaker named as trustee." My breath caught. The trust grants Dorothy the legal right to reside in either property for the remainder of her life. Upon her passing, both properties will be transferred equally to Jake and Emily Whitaker. Elisa's face paled. "That's not possible," she said, her voice tight. "Those houses are in my name." Mr. Bradley nodded. The Willow Street property was indeed purchased jointly. However, Lucas transferred his share into the trust 3 years ago, with your signature on the deed transfer. "That was just estate planning," she snapped. "He told me it was routine." "The vacation home," he continued calmly. was purchased directly into the trust and never included your name on any legal document. I remembered that day signing papers over tea. Lucas said it was just to simplify things. Elisa had rolled her eyes but signed anyway. As for financial assets, Mr. Bradley continued, Lucas's retirement accounts, totaling approximately $875,000, will be distributed as follows. 60% to a trust for Jake and Emily's education and living needs with Dorothy as trustee. 20% directly to Dorothy for her care and maintenance. 20% to Alyssa Whitaker. The silence in the room was suffocating. Alyssa's composure cracked. 20%? She hissed. That's it? I'm his wife. There is no mistake, Ms. Whitaker, Mr. Bradley replied evenly. Lucas was of sound mind and received both legal and medical confirmation of his capacity at the time of these changes. She pushed her chair back with a screech. This can be contested. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was drugged. Bradley remained unfazed. I would advise against that. There is more. And with that, he picked up a sealed envelope from the folder and held it between his fingers.
A letter from Lucas to be read if you chose to contest his wishes. Would you like me to read it now, or shall we continue? Alyssa stared at it like it might burn her. Her jaw clenched. Continue, she said through her teeth. And so we did. The day after the reading of the will, I found a manila envelope on the front table. Inside were the papers. Alyssa had filed a lawsuit contesting the will. She claimed Lucas had been unduly influenced, that his mental state had deteriorated in his final weeks, and that I had manipulated him while he was dying. She had hired Winston Green, a name that sent a chill down my spine the moment I heard it. Known for his aggressive tactics in probate and divorce court, he wasn't cheap or kind. I stood in the kitchen staring at the paperwork, my hands trembling. I had no money to hire an attorney. Everything I'd ever had, my home, my savings, Richard's life insurance, was tied up in the trust or had been handed to Lucas years ago. And Elisa, she had money, connections, and no shame. I called the only person I could think of, Janet. She was my oldest friend and a retired judge. I hadn't spoken to her in months. We drifted apart after Richard died. But the moment she heard my voice, she knew something was wrong. Don't panic, she said after I explained. I know exactly who you need. Enter Marion Hale. An elder law attorney with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, Marion walked into my life like a storm wrapped in silk. She wore flat shoes, spoke in clipped, precise sentences, and didn't bother with pleasantries. This is a textbook case of financial elder abuse, she said, flipping through the will and lawsuit in her office. Your son saw it. He took steps to protect you. Now we're going to finish what he started. She agreed to represent me at a reduced fee payable after the case was resolved. You're not alone, Dorothy, she said. And you're not powerless. Elisa's first move was to try to force me out of the house while the case was pending. Marion filed an emergency stay. Blocked. Her second move was more insidious. She began planting seeds in the community, telling Jake and Emily's school that I was confused, forgetful, emotionally unstable. She spoke to neighbors in careful, worried tones, framing me as someone who needed help. It's been hard on her, she would say. She's not herself. Then came the whispers, Dorothy's slipping. She thinks people are after her. She's been talking to herself. She might need supervision. Even the children picked up on it. One afternoon, Emily sat beside me on the porch swing and asked, Grandma, are you sick? My heart broke. No, sweetheart, I said gently. Why would you think that? Mom says you might have to go to a special place, she said. She says you're not safe. Jake, more blunt at 14, demanded, why is she saying this stuff? Is it true? I looked at them, both so young, caught in the middle of something far too cruel. Your mom and I have different ideas about what's best, I said carefully, but I love you both. That hasn't changed. Elisa walked in right then, saw us together, and her eyes narrowed. She didn't say a word. But her silence screamed, this isn't over. She was right. It was only just beginning. One Thursday evening, about 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, I walked past Lucas's old office and saw Alyssa sitting at his desk. She didn't notice me at first. The desk drawers were open, files spread out like she was searching for something specific. Her shoulders were tense, lips pursed. She looked nothing like a grieving widow. She looked like a woman on the edge. What are you doing? I asked from the doorway. She jumped, then spun around with a forced smile. This is still my house, Dorothy. I can look through my husband's things if I want to. Her tone was flat, cold. I said nothing, just watched as she gathered the files into a messy stack and shoved them back in the drawer. But I had seen her. She wasn't browsing. She was hunting. That night, while she was out another business dinner, she said I returned to the office. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that Lucas had once told me Mr. Bradley knows. Just trust me. The room smelled faintly of his cologne. The chair creaked under my weight as I sat down. I pulled open every drawer. Receipts, notebooks, old tax returns. And then in the bottom drawer, taped beneath a stack of archived folders, I found it. A small envelope. My name written on the front in Lucas's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a USB drive and a single sheet of paper handwritten. Mom, if you're reading this, it means things went the way I feared. Alyssa has shown her true colors. Everything you need is on this drive. Financial records, emails, audio recordings. I started collecting it the moment I knew something wasn't right. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I wanted to protect you. And I needed time. Time I ran out of. I love you. Thank you for always believing in me. Now it's your turn to believe in yourself. Lucas. Tears spilled before I even inserted the USB into my laptop. What I found on that drive shattered what little illusion I had left. Alyssa had been transferring money from their joint accounts to a private account in her name for over a year. She had been emailing someone named Ryan romantic, explicit emails dating back nearly 2 years filled with plans to sell the houses, move to Arizona, and get rid of the burden. And then the recordings. In our state, one-party consent made it legal. Lucas had known that, and he had prepared for this. Alyssa's voice, unmistakably hers. Once the old bat is tucked away in a care home and Lucas is gone, we liquidate everything. Nobody's going to question it. I covered my mouth to stop the sound that came out of me. It wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. It was theft. And Lucas, my son, while dying, had quietly fought to leave behind something stronger than vengeance. He'd left the truth. The next morning, I called Marion and said only 5 words. I have something for you, Dot. The war Alyssa started was about to shift, because now I had ammunition. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined, almost too intimate. The wood-paneled walls, the rows of empty benches, the quiet hum of fluorescent lighting, it felt more like a school auditorium than the place where my future would be decided. I sat beside Marion, my back straight despite the pain in my joints, my hands folded neatly in my lap to keep them from trembling. Across the aisle, Alyssa sat flanked by Winston Green, all sleek confidence in a dark navy dress and a pearl necklace that looked more like armor than jewelry. She didn't look at me once. Judge Harriet Collins entered stern, composed, somewhere in her 60s with the kind of no-nonsense energy that made you sit up a little straighter. This hearing is to address the petition to contest the will of Lucas Whitaker, she began, flipping through the file in front of her. The petitioner claims the decedent was not of sound mind and was subject to undue influence at the time of the will's amendment. She looked up at us, eyes sharp. Ms. Hale, I understand you filed a motion to dismiss the petition with newly discovered evidence. Yes, Your Honor, Marion said, rising to her feet. We believe this evidence renders the petitioner's claims entirely meritless. Winston was already on his feet. Objection. The evidence was not submitted as part of initial discovery. It was only discovered recently, Marion countered. And we followed proper procedure to admit it. Judge Collins adjusted her glasses, studying us for a beat. I'll allow it, she said finally, but I will determine admissibility after review. Proceed. Marion nodded and called her first witness. Me. I stood and walked slowly to the witness stand. The oath felt heavy in my mouth, but I said every word clearly. Marion guided me, gently asking about my relationship with Lucas, my living situation, the transfer of my home and savings, and the nature of Elisa's relationship with me in recent years. I spoke plainly, not dramatically, not emotionally manipulative. Just the truth. Then it was Winston's turn. Mrs. Whitaker, he began with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Isn't it true that you were financially dependent on your son? Yes, I answered. After my husband died, I gave everything to Lucas and Elisa. I trusted them. And now that Lucas is gone, you stand to gain control of assets that would otherwise belong to his wife? Marion objected. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Collins said. He shifted tactics. Have you ever been diagnosed with dementia or memory impairment? No. But you admit you didn't know Lucas had changed his will. He told me he had made arrangements but didn't share the details. He wanted to protect me. He leaned forward. Protect you from what? From exactly what's happening now. A beat of silence. Then Marion stood. Your Honor, we would now like to present the evidence found in Lucas Whitter's records, including financial documents, private emails, and audio recordings. Winston stood abruptly. We object. Mr. Green, Judge Collins said firmly, I will review the material myself. Sit down. And so Marion began. She played audio of Alyssa's voice, clear, unmistakable. Once the old bat is tucked away and Lucas is gone, we liquidate everything and move to Arizona. No one will question it. The courtroom went still. Then came the emails messages between Alyssa and a man named Ryan Kendall discussing their affair, their plans, and their anticipation of Lucas's death. Finally, Marion called her surprise witness, Ryan himself. He walked in looking pale, nervous. He refused to meet Alyssa's eyes. Mr. Kendall, Marion asked, can you confirm the nature of your relationship with Alyssa Whittaker? We were involved romantically, he muttered. For how long? Almost 2 years. Did she ever mention her husband's illness? Yes, she said she was waiting for it to be over, that she'd inherit everything. Alyssa gasped audibly. You traitor, she spat. Judge Collins slammed her gavel. Ms. Whittaker, control yourself or you will be removed. But the damage was done. Ryan's testimony confirmed everything. And across the room, I saw Jake sitting in the back row, his face pale, his eyes wide. He had insisted on attending. Now he knew the truth. I could see it in the way his shoulders stiffened, his jaw clenched. He knew who his mother really was. And he knew what his father had done to protect us. Judge Collins took a full week to review the evidence, but I knew the moment she stepped back into the courtroom. Her eyes never wavered as she delivered the ruling. The petition to contest the will is hereby dismissed in full. All provisions of the amended will are upheld. Alyssa barely reacted. Her face was frozen, lips pressed into a tight line, fury simmering just beneath the surface. Outside the courtroom, she cornered me by the elevators. This isn't over, she hissed. You've poisoned everything. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing. No, Alyssa, I said quietly. You did that all by yourself. She didn't speak to me again. A week later, she moved out. She took her 20%, nearly $175,000 from Lucas's retirement, and left town with Ryan. They headed to Phoenix, chasing the future they'd whispered about in stolen emails and late-night calls. From what I heard, they didn't last 6 months. Some fantasies only survive in secrecy. In the daylight, they crumble. What surprised everyone was how quickly Alyssa gave up custody of Jake and Emily. She said it was in their best interest to stay in a stable environment. But I think she just didn't want to deal with the guilt in their eyes. Jake didn't hesitate. He packed his bags that same night and moved into the room next to mine. Emily took a few more weeks. She was only 10, still clinging to some hope that her mother might return to the woman she used to be. But hope fades fast when phone calls come less often and visits never happen. Eventually, she joined us too. The first few months were hard. We cried often. Lucas's absence loomed in every room. The kids grieved not just their father, but the mother they thought they knew. Sometimes Jake would come downstairs in the middle of the night and just sit with me in silence. Emily asked questions I couldn't answer. Why would mom lie? Why didn't dad tell us sooner? So I found us a family therapist, not because I had answers, but because I wanted them to have space to heal. We learned how to talk about the hard things, how to sit with pain without being swallowed by it. And little by little, something remarkable happened. We began to laugh again. Jake started helping with the family business. He'd shadow board meetings, ask questions, take notes like he was already preparing to lead. Dad wanted us to know how it worked.